What if you came home one afternoon to find a stranger sitting on your couch, eating snacks, and claiming your house as hers, all while the police hesitated to believe you were the rightful owner? Sounds like something out of a movie, right? But for Bernard Johnson and his family, this wasn't fiction. It was the beginning of a nightmare that exposed deep-rooted corruption, racial bias, and a system that almost protected the criminals instead of the victims. When a bold trespasser named Karen refused to leave and called in her city inspector husband, things escalated fast. What followed wasn't just a legal fight. It became a national reckoning. Bribery, false reports, public meltdowns, even federal charges, this story has it all. And the most shocking part? It all started with a bag of chips and one arrogant lie. Speech balloon. Now we want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. Thumbs up, like the video if you believe in standing up to injustice. Bell, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the next jaw-dropping story we bring to life. Part 1, The Couch Queen of Riverside Heights. It was a Tuesday morning like any other in Riverside Heights, a quiet suburb with manicured lawns, flag-lined porches, and the gentle hum of sprinklers greeting the sunrise. Bernard Johnson, a seasoned civil rights attorney and senior partner at Johnson & Associates, had just settled into his office in downtown. As usual, he had a stack of depositions to review and a coffee that had gone cold before the first sip. Then came the call. His wife, Alicia, was rarely shaken. But her voice over the phone. Sharp. Controlled rage bubbling just beneath the surface. "Bernard," she said through clenched teeth, "you need to get home. Now." 20 minutes later, Bernard pulled into the driveway of his colonial-style home, the one he'd earned with blood, sweat, and 18-hour days in courtrooms across the state. The house stood proud and serene, but something was off. There was no welcome from Alicia at the door. No baby coos from their 6-month-old son, Marcus Jr., just unease. Then he saw her. Sprawled across his pristine Italian leather sectional like she'd been born, there was a woman he'd never seen before. Middle-aged. Blonde. Her hair scraped into that unmistakable, "I want to speak to your manager," bun. She wore a stained tank top and a pair of ill-fitting shorts that hadn't fit her properly in at least 2 decades. Her lap was littered with potato chip crumbs, like some bizarre celebration of trespass. And she was shouting. Not to herself. At Alicia, who stood near the staircase with baby Marcus in her arms, composed, but her eyes flashed with that familiar mix of fire and fury. Bernard's lawyer voice kicked in before his brain could fully process what he was witnessing. "Excuse me," he said, stepping forward, his tone cool and lethal. "Who the hell are you, and why are you in my home?" The woman twisted around with theatrical outrage. Her name was Karen, not by birth, but by the kind of behavior that earns a person that label. "Your house," she screeched, spraying chip crumbs like shrapnel. "This is my house now. I have rights. You people think you can just move in and take over neighborhoods that don't belong to you?" Bernard blinked. The audacity hit harder than any courtroom argument he'd ever faced. This wasn't confusion. This was entitlement, weaponized and wrapped in the kind of racism he'd battled his whole career. Karen wasn't just trespassing. She was making herself at home. In his home. His hands clenched. His jaw locked. But his voice remained steady. That low, dangerous calm that once made a federal judge pause mid-sentence. "Ma'am," he said, "you've got exactly 1 minute to tell me why you're here before I call the police." Karen smirked, reached into a plastic grocery bag, and pulled out a piece of paper. "I've been here for 3 hours," she said. "Squatters' rights. This house is mine now." 3 hours. Bernard stared at her, then at the crayon-scrawled name on what appeared to be one of his family's utility bills. The kind his toddler might have scribbled on. And just like that, Tuesday turned into a battlefield. Part 2, a call, a lie, and the storm that followed. Bernard didn't call the police immediately. Not because he hesitated, no, his instincts were sharp, but because something in Karen's smug grin told him this wouldn't be a simple removal. This was going to be messy. Still holding the forged bill like it was the Magna Carta, Karen leaned back into the sectional and grabbed another handful of chips. "Go ahead," she said between crunches. "Call 911. Let's see who they believe." Alicia didn't say a word, but Bernard could feel the pressure radiating from her. She cradled baby Marcus, gently rocking him while her eyes stayed locked on Karen. Bernard pulled out his phone and dialed. 911, what's your emergency? This is Bernard Johnson, 1247, Riverside Heights Drive. I have an intruder in my home who refuses to leave and is making threats. The dispatcher's voice was oddly neutral. Are you the homeowner, sir? Yes, I am. I have my deed, identification, and legal documents here. The woman broke in and is claiming squatter's rights after sitting here for 3 hours. He barely got the last words out before something shocking happened. Karen, in a blur of movement, lunged forward and snatched the phone out of his hand. Help me, she screamed into the receiver, her voice pitching into a wail. There's a black man in my house. He's threatening me. He's got a gang with him. I think they're armed. Bernard was stunned. For someone who could barely lift herself off the couch, she moved fast when it counted. He reclaimed the phone in an instant, but the damage was done. The dispatcher had already shifted tone. Sir, I need you to remain calm. Officers are en route. Please keep everyone separated until they arrive. The word gang echoed in Bernard's head like a gunshot. She had just turned a trespassing incident into a high-risk call-out, and they were the targets. 20 minutes later, 4 squad cars pulled up to the house. 4. Not 1. Not 2. 4. Bernard stepped out onto the porch with his hands visible. Alicia stayed inside with Marcus, refusing to let that woman get anywhere near their child. Officer Janet Martinez led the response. She entered with caution, hand on her holster, her partner, Officer Thompson, just behind. What's going on here? She asked, voice clipped. Before Bernard could explain, Karen launched into her performance. Oh, thank God you're here. These people broke in. They're threatening me. I've been living here peacefully and they just showed up with their whole gang. She pointed to Alicia. That one's got weapons in her diaper bag. Bernard stepped forward. Officer, this is my house. You can see our family photos. Wedding pictures. My law degree. This woman broke in and is claiming ownership. Martinez's eyes scanned the walls. Family portraits. Law diplomas. Baby photos. She turned to Karen. Ma'am, do you have any proof of residency? Karen, triumphant, held out her crayon-marked utility bill. Martinez stared. Ma'am. This is a child's drawing on a real utility bill. That's how I pay bills, Karen insisted. I don't trust computers. Bernard calmly handed over his driver's license, deed, mortgage statement, insurance paperwork, all perfectly documented. Martinez glanced through the papers. Sir, we'll need to verify this. Given the complexity, I'm going to ask everyone to come down to the station. Bernard raised an eyebrow. Complexity? Officer, this woman broke in. Trespassing, fraud, false police report. There's nothing complex about it. Then Karen did something even more audacious. She clutched her chest, eyes wide, and gasped, he's being aggressive. I'm afraid for my life. I want him arrested for intimidating a white woman. The room chilled. Martinez stiffened. Thompson shifted. Everyone knew what this was, racial manipulation weaponized. But Bernard was ready. Calm. Precise. Officer Martinez, he said, if you don't arrest this woman for the crime she's clearly committed, I'll file for selective enforcement. I know my rights. I'm an officer of the court. That got her attention. Martinez was a professional, and she wasn't about to end her career over Karen's meltdown. But Karen wasn't done. Because what happened next would change everything. Part 3, the bulldozer arrives. It was almost theatrical, the way the next act unfolded. As if some divine playwright had decided this drama needed a new villain. 20 minutes after Karen declared she was calling her husband, the stillness of Riverside Heights was shattered by the growl of a battered, rust-red pickup truck barreling down the street. The neighbors were already watching. Phones raised. Curtains twitched. A man emerged from the truck like he'd stepped out of a cliché. Heavy-set, red-faced, wearing a polo shirt tucked into cargo shorts that surrendered against his belly. His presence alone demanded attention, not from stature or confidence, but from sheer, unfiltered belligerence. He didn't look at the squad cars. He didn't acknowledge the 2 uniformed officers standing by the door. He stomped up to the porch like he owned it, like the badge in his wallet wasn't just made of plastic and favors. "What the hell is going on here, Brenda?" he barked, ignoring Bernard, the police, and even the crowd forming on the sidewalks. Bernard crossed his arms as Alicia quietly stepped back, keeping Marcus away from the blast radius of what was clearly a man used to yelling first and asking questions never. Karen, or Brenda, as she was now fully outed, launched into her victim monologue again. "They're trying to steal our house. I was just sitting here peacefully and they came in with their gang and started threatening me." Chip's eyes scanned the room, finally catching the decor. Framed wedding portraits of Bernard and Alicia, a law degree mounted on the wall, a baby jumper draped across the back of a chair. The air shifted. Reality tugged at him, briefly. "Brenda," he muttered. "Whose house is this?" She didn't even blink. "Ours now. I've been here for hours. Squatters' rights." For a heartbeat, Chip looked like he might fold under the weight of her delusion. But then, no. He doubled down. "Officer," he said to Martinez, puffing his chest. "Let's not make this a bigger mess than it needs to be. My wife got confused. We'll be on our way." Bernard didn't flinch. "No, she won't." Martinez stepped in. "Sir, your wife is being detained. She's under investigation for breaking and entering, trespassing, and filing a false report." That's when Chip snapped. "Now hold on a damn minute," he growled, puffing up like a frog on a hot plate. "Do you even know who I am?" "I'm Charles Kowalski, Senior Building Inspector for the City of Brookline. I've worked with the police department for over 2 decades. This is outrageous." He yanked out his city-issued ID, flashing it like it was a shield. "Commissioner Reynolds and I golf every Sunday. One call from me and this whole misunderstanding disappears." Martinez didn't even flinch. "Sir, attempting to use your position to influence an ongoing criminal matter is itself a chargeable offense." Chip's face turned crimson. "Are you threatening me?" "No," Martinez replied calmly. "I'm informing you." And still, the man didn't stop. "I can make life very difficult for people who don't show proper respect to city officials." That's when Bernard knew, they weren't just dealing with delusion anymore. This was arrogance. This was power left unchecked. And Chip was about to bury himself alive, one stupid word at a time. "You know what the problem is here?" Chip continued, raising his voice for the neighbors to hear. "This whole damn neighborhood has gone to hell since they started letting certain types of people move in." Silence. Alicia's eyes flashed. Bernard's jaw flexed. Property values are tanking. Crime's creeping in. And now this? This is what we get when the wrong people start calling themselves homeowners. Karen nodded vigorously, apparently pleased to have someone reinforce her narrative. Thompson looked like he wanted to melt through the floor. Martinez's expression hardened. Bernard slowly stepped forward. "Say that again," he said, voice low and heavy. But Chip had said enough. More than enough. Because what neither he nor Karen knew was that every word, every bigoted syllable, every reckless lie had been recorded, not just by the officers' body cams, but by a dozen cell phones outside and a live stream that was already climbing toward 50,000 views online. Bernard turned to Martinez. "I believe you now have cause to detain Mr. Kowalski as well." But it wasn't over. Not yet. Karen, in one final flourish of entitlement, dug into her purse and pulled out a phone that looked like it had survived several natural disasters. She jabbed a speed dial. "You know what? I'm calling Chip. He's gonna straighten this whole mess out." A beat passed. "Chip, you get your butt down here. These people are trying to have me arrested." She shrieked into the phone, as though Chip wasn't already in the room. The line was still open. Loud enough for Bernard, the officers, and at least 2 neighbors on Facebook lived to hear. "Brenda, what did you do now? You didn't break into another house again, did you?" Silence. "Then, I thought it was abandoned," she screamed. "You said we needed more space." Everyone heard it. Even Chip turned paler. "I'm warning you, Chip," Brenda shouted, "if you don't fix this, I'm telling everyone at the lodge about your little problem with the receipts." Martinez raised an eyebrow. "Receipts?" Chip looked like he'd swallowed a cactus. Bernard's legal brain fired on all cylinders. Corruption. Financial misconduct. Misuse of public office. It was all unraveling right there in his living room, and all because Karen couldn't resist proving she was above consequences. 20 minutes later, Karen was in cuffs. Officer Thompson read her rights while she blubbered about conspiracies and reverse racism. Chip, red-faced and silent, had lawyered up on the spot, or tried to. But nobody wanted to represent a man who just confessed to using city influence and hurling racially charged accusations live on social media. As they were led out of the house, Bernard stood by the door, watching them go. "You people will regret this." Karen screamed as she was placed in the back seat. "We're filing harassment charges." Chip barked. "And you'll be hearing from my lawyer." Bernard simply raised a hand. "Tell him to bring crayons." Alicia chuckled quietly from the hallway. Baby Marcus let out a soft coo. As the patrol cars pulled away and the neighborhood crowd slowly dispersed, Bernard took a long breath. The adrenaline was still in his bloodstream, but something else was rising: focus. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Karen and Chip had tried to weaponize racism, corruption, and status. But they'd picked the wrong home. The wrong family. The wrong man. Bernard wasn't just a homeowner. He was a lawyer, and the war they'd started was going to be fought in a courtroom. And this time, the people with crayon bills and fake rights wouldn't get to rewrite the story. Part 4, Paper Trails and Pandora's Box. 3 days after Karen Kowalski was pried off Bernard's sectional and hauled into a squad car, the Johnson household was calm again, but it wasn't quiet. Peace doesn't return immediately after an invasion. It simmers, slow and uneven, like a house remembering it was violated. Bernard had returned to his law office downtown, the same one where that fateful Tuesday had begun. But now, his caseload had shifted. He wasn't reviewing depositions for clients anymore. He was building the most explosive case of his career. And it was personal. He stood at the window, staring down at the morning traffic, when there was a knock. Jessica Rodriguez stepped in, Bernard's longtime paralegal and possibly the only person in the world who could out-organize a federal agency. She was holding a thick manila folder, thick enough to make a noise when it landed on the desk. "You're going to want to sit down," she said with a grin. Bernard raised an eyebrow. "What did you find?" She tapped the folder. "Chip Kowalski is a very interesting man." He took the file, flipped it open, and began scanning. The first document alone made his blood run cold, a public records request containing 5 years' worth of building permit approvals, all signed by Chip. Jessica sat down opposite him. Start with the permits. 17 major construction projects in the last 5 years. Want to guess how many of those contractors are connected to the same lodge Brenda screamed about during her meltdown? Bernard didn't look up. All of them. Jessica smirked. 15. The other 2. Wire transfers to Chip's personal bank account. We have the records. Bernard flipped faster now. Page after page of scanned invoices, permits, emails, and financial statements. Each one was a thread, and together they were a noose. Chip hasn't just been bending the rules, Jessica said. He's been manufacturing his own. Bribes, fake inspections, fast-tracking permits for kickbacks. The guy makes a crooked alderman look like a saint. Bernard leaned back in his chair. This isn't just corruption. It's a racket. It gets better, Jessica said, leaning forward like a poker player with an unbeatable hand. Remember how Brenda threatened him about the receipts? Yes. Jessica pulled out another folder and slid it across the desk. Turns out that wasn't just marital drama. Chip's been submitting fake reimbursement receipts to the city for over a decade. Personal vacations disguised as building inspection trips. Equipment that doesn't exist. Overtime hours he never worked. Bernard scanned the evidence. The math was staggering. Tens of thousands in fabricated expenses. Possibly hundreds of thousands if they dug deeper. Jessica wasn't done. And the best part? He's been under federal investigation for 8 months. Bernard's head snapped up. What? She pulled out the final document like it was a royal flush. A federal subpoena, dated 6 months ago, requesting all records relating to Chip's inspection activity, financial transactions, and public service conduct. The FBI was already sniffing around, she explained. They just didn't have the nail to drive into the coffin. Until now. Bernard stood, adrenaline sharpening his posture. And we gave it to them. Jessica nodded. We gave them motive, pattern, and now, racial intent. Brenda's history makes this more than financial corruption. It's civil rights abuse. He sat back down slowly, the implications clicking into place like tumblers in a vault. We're not just looking at a corrupt inspector and his unhinged wife. Jessica smiled grimly. We're looking at a coordinated scheme to target families of color. Intimidate, displace, and claim property through threats and fraud. A silence passed between them. Bernard tapped the subpoena. Who's the federal prosecutor? Jessica answered without hesitation. Maria Santos. Bernard smiled. Call her. She's going to want to see this. 2 hours later, Maria Santos sat in Bernard's office, reviewing the documents with the same intensity Bernard had seen during their early days at law school. She hadn't changed. Sharp eyes, quick tongue, and a memory like a steel trap. This is perfect, she said, flipping through the folder. We've been struggling to prove pattern, motive, intent. But this? This turns a corruption case into a full-blown civil rights lawsuit. It's not just fraud. It's systemic racial targeting. Bernard nodded. Chip and Brenda have been doing this for years. We've identified at least 6 other families. All black or Hispanic. All claiming Brenda broke in. All filed false police reports. And Chip. He showed up each time with city credentials to resolve the dispute. Maria's expression darkened. That's abuse under color of authority. We can bring federal civil rights charges. She closed the folder and leaned forward. But I need more than criminal pressure. I want them desperate. Desperate enough to implicate others. Because people like Chip never work alone. Bernard met her gaze. What are you thinking? Maria tapped the folder. File a civil lawsuit. Loud, expensive, public. Let them feel cornered. They'll make mistakes. Bernard stood, already planning. You want me to bait them? I want you to flush them out, she replied. You've got the credibility. You've got the platform. Make them sweat. Bernard extended his hand. Let's take them down. Maria shook it. Let's make them history. The next morning, Bernard filed what would later be known in legal circles as Johnson v. Kowalski, the landmark civil case. A 47-page complaint alleging civil rights violations, emotional distress, conspiracy to commit fraud, abuse of authority, defamation, racial targeting. He sought $2.5 million in damages and asked for punitive measures that would keep both Kowalskis tied up in legal knots for a generation. He leaked the lawsuit, intentionally, to every major news outlet in the state. CNN picked it up by noon. By sundown, Karen Kowalski was trending on Twitter again, thanks to leaked bodycam footage showing her screeching about squatters' rights while dusting chipped crumbs off Bernard's sectional. By nightfall, Bernard's office phone rang. It was exactly who he expected. Johnson and Associates. This is Bernard. Mr. Johnson, this is Randolph Fitzpatrick III from Fitzpatrick Sterling and Associates. I represent Mr. and Mrs. Kowalski. Bernard had to suppress a laugh. Fitzpatrick was notorious in legal circles, flashy, overpriced, and spectacularly ineffective in court. My clients wish to settle, Fitzpatrick said. They're offering $50,000 to resolve the matter quietly. Bernard didn't miss a beat. Tell your clients to use that money to hire a competent attorney. This case is going to trial. He hung up. Phase 1 was complete. Now, it was time to see how deep the corruption ran, and who else would be stupid enough to stand with the Kowalskis. Part 5, a lawsuit, a meltdown, and a microphone. 2 days after Bernard filed the civil lawsuit, things began to spiral, not for Bernard, but for the Kowalskis. The complaint, 47 pages of legal devastation, had hit local news like a thunderclap. What began as a bizarre home invasion story had evolved into a high-profile case of systemic civil rights abuse. And thanks to a combination of Bernard's legal precision and Jessica Rodriguez's airtight documentation, the story was impossible to ignore. By the third morning, Bernard's office was flooded. Reporters called for comment. Advocacy groups sent letters of support. Former victims of the Kowalskis began coming out of the woodwork, sharing eerily similar stories. And most importantly, so did lawyers. Jessica, typing furiously while sipping black coffee, glanced up. "Boss, you're going to want to see this." She turned her screen toward Bernard. The headline on the city's largest news outlet read, "City Inspector Claims Racial Bias in Lawsuit, Denies All Wrongdoing." Below the title was a photo of Chip standing on the steps of City Hall, red-faced, arms raised like a man who thought volume could erase guilt. Bernard chuckled. He really said that publicly? Jessica grinned. Oh, he said more than that. She clicked play on a video. Chip's voice blared from the speakers. "This whole lawsuit is just a shakedown by a race-baiting lawyer trying to profit off white guilt. My wife and I are the real victims here. This is persecution against hard-working, tax-paying Americans." Jessica paused the video. "It gets worse." She skipped ahead to a moment where Chip faced a reporter's pointed question, "Mr. Kowalski, are you saying you've never shown favoritism in your city role?" Chip puffed his chest and replied, "I've never. Not once, approved a permit for any reason other than code compliance and merit. Every contractor I've ever signed off on earned it." Jessica smirked. "Should I show him the 15 bribes and the 2 bank wires?" Bernard leaned back in his chair. "Let him keep talking. Every lie he tells is another nail in his legal coffin." That same afternoon, the front page of the Riverside Register featured a new article, "City Inspector Challenges Corruption Charges." Denies FBI involvement in it. Chip was quoted saying, "There is no federal investigation. That's just another lie spread by Johnson and his media allies. If there's proof, let them show it." Bernard's phone rang 5 minutes later. "Santos," the voice on the other end said. Bernard smiled. "You saw it?" "I'm printing the article for evidence," Maria Santos replied. "He just publicly denied a federal investigation that's been open for 8 months. That's obstruction of justice in spirit, maybe in fact. You ready to move early? We've already coordinated with Internal Affairs and the FBI's corruption unit. Arrests will happen by the end of the week." Bernard grinned. "Want me to bring popcorn?" "No," Maria replied. "I want you to keep that civil case public. The louder this gets, the more desperate they'll become." 2 days later, Karen re-entered the public stage. With her signature sunglasses perched atop her head like a crown and a leopard print scarf loosely tied around her neck, she stood in front of her supporters, mostly other HOA malcontents and confused retirees, and launched into what could only be described as a performance. Bernard watched it live from his office, arms crossed, lips tight. Karen shrieked into the microphone, "I was just trying to find a better home for my family. That lawyer twisted everything. He invaded my space." Then came the soundbite of the week: "Squatters' rights are a real thing. If a home is unoccupied and you're in it for more than 72 hours, it's legally yours." Bernard blinked. Jessica, who had paused mid-email, whispered, "She just invented a law." Bernard leaned forward. "Run her name through county eviction records again. See how often she's pulled this trick." 10 minutes later, Jessica returned with a frown. 3 evictions in 2 years. All involved Brenda, excuse me, Karen. Breaking in, claiming squatters' rights, and filing false harassment claims. Bernard's jaw tightened. And how many of the victims were families of color? Jessica didn't need to answer. She simply turned her laptop toward him. 6 faces. All black or Hispanic. Bernard exhaled. Pattern, motive, and racial targeting. We have the foundation for federal civil rights escalation. Jessica nodded. And the kicker? Chip filed complaints with the city each time, claiming code violations against the original owners. Bernard stood. Time to turn this from a case into a reckoning. The next day, a local news station aired bodycam footage from the original call at Bernard's house. Karen was front and center, screaming about gangs and people like them. The video quickly went viral, not just locally, but nationwide. Twitter exploded with hashtags. #CouchKaren, #SquatterSaga, #WrongHouseWrongCentury. TikTok clips flooded timelines, reenactments of Karen yelling into the phone, Bernard calmly citing property law, Alicia bouncing Marcus while giving a death glare that could shatter glass. Within 48 hours, Bernard Johnson was being called America's realest lawyer. On Friday at 6:17 a.m., Bernard was sipping coffee when his phone buzzed with a one-line text from Maria, "It's done." Both in custody. Chip had been arrested at home on charges of bribery, wire fraud, conspiracy, abuse of authority, civil rights violations under federal statute. Karen was picked up shortly after, charged with filing false police reports, attempted property fraud, federal civil rights violations. The city's Internal Affairs Division immediately launched a full audit of the building inspection office. The story dominated every major outlet. CNN called. NPR requested an interview. Even 60 Minutes sent a producer to Riverside Heights. Jessica peeked into Bernard's office around 10 a.m., waving a newspaper. The front page headline read, "From couch crumbs to criminal charges, the Kowalskis fall hard." She dropped the paper and added, "Their lawyer just filed a motion to withdraw. Turns out they bounced 3 checks and lied about their finances." Bernard raised his eyebrows. Even their attorneys abandoning ship? Jessica nodded. They've got a court-appointed lawyer now. And you'll love this, the prosecutor's team just shared that Chip tried to claim he was doing the city a favor by approving subpar construction to speed up growth. Bernard sighed. He's going to jail for a long time. That afternoon, Bernard stood in the back of the federal courtroom gallery as the Kowalskis appeared in shackles. The contrast between the arrogant couple who had marched into his living room and the broken pair shuffling in chains was jarring. Chip's cheeks were sunken. Karen's lips were trembling. The judge reviewed the charges, then turned to the bail hearing. The prosecutor, not Maria this time, but one of her deputies, stood and read from a prepared statement. Given the defendant's history of intimidation, ongoing civil rights violations, and risk of tampering with evidence, the government requests that both remain in custody without bail. Karen burst into tears. Chip muttered under his breath. The judge raised an eyebrow. Bail is set at $500,000 each. Assets remain frozen pending the outcome of the civil and criminal investigations. As they were led away, Bernard caught Chip's eye. There was no defiance this time, only fear. Back at home, Alicia had prepared tea. The living room, the one Karen had defiled with her crumbs and entitlement, now felt warm again. Safe. Marcus lay on the playmat, gurgling. They're really going to prison, aren't they? Alicia asked softly. Bernard nodded. And the lawsuit? That's just beginning. Part 6, Courtroom Fireworks and the Fall of the Kowalskis. 6 months had passed since Karen had sprawled across Bernard Johnson's couch with a bag of chips and a crayon-forged utility bill. But on the first morning of the federal trial, that memory still sat heavy on Bernard's chest like a stone. It was the moment everything had changed. The moment when home became battleground, and law became a weapon for justice. The courthouse steps looked like a scene out of a political thriller. News vans lined the block. Protesters flanked either side of the courthouse holding signs that read, "Corruption is colorblind, but justice sees everything," and "No more Karens in power." Civil rights groups, community organizers, and families from Riverside Heights and beyond had come to witness what the local press was already calling the trial of the century. Inside, security was tight. Every bag was scanned twice. Every ID checked. The gallery was standing room only by 8 a.m. Bernard entered quietly through a private side entrance arranged by Maria Santos' office. As lead witness and original victim, the courtroom had become more than just his stage, it was his war zone. In the defendant's box, Chip and Karen Kowalski sat wearing federal orange. No polo shirts. No scarves. Just plain jumpsuits and shackles, the uniforms of consequence. Karen looked agitated, her eyes darting around the courtroom like a bird in a cage. Chip, on the other hand, looked like a man who had aged a decade. His jaw slack, his gut hanging heavy, his spirit long gone. At 8:32 a.m., Judge Patricia Morrison entered the room. The proceedings began. Maria Santos rose for the government's opening statement. Her voice was steady, measured, but each word landed like a punch. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not about confusion. It is not about a property dispute. It is about power. How it's used, and more importantly, how it's abused. She gestured toward the defendants. For over a decade, Charles "Chip" Kowalski used his role as a building inspector to enrich himself and weaponize his office. With him was his wife, Karen, who repeatedly targeted minority families, breaking into homes, filing false claims, and using the legal system to displace lawful owners. Then Maria paused, her voice dropping slightly. But this isn't just about fraud. This is about race. This is about systemic harassment, often cloaked in the language of legality but driven by bigotry. And when they finally chose the Johnson family, a black attorney, his wife, and their infant son, they picked the wrong house. The wrong generation. And the wrong century. The jury was riveted. Even Judge Morrison nodded subtly before calling for the defense. The defense attorney, a tired-looking public defender on his third team after 3 previous lawyers abandoned the Kowalskis, stood and tried to shift the narrative. "My clients," he began, "are flawed but misunderstood. There was no racial intent. There was confusion, yes, but not criminality. And certainly not corruption on the scale the prosecution claims. But the damage was already done. The body cam footage. The social media storm. The press interviews. The FBI subpoenas. The civil lawsuit still in progress. The mountain of receipts, permits, and forged signatures. This wasn't a leak. It was a flood. The first 3 days of testimony were devastating. Former city employees testified under oath that Chip regularly skipped inspections, took envelopes at lunch meetings, and personally altered inspection reports for friendly contractors, many of whom happened to belong to the same lodge he bragged about. City contractors admitted that they were encouraged to donate to a fake charity that funneled money directly to Chip's bank account. A former assistant from the building inspection office testified that complaints about Chip's misconduct were quietly buried, usually at his request. Maria introduced evidence showing that over $300,000 had flowed through personal accounts belonging to the Kowalskis, all unreported. Then came the racial component. 6 different families, from different parts of the city, told nearly identical stories. A white woman named Karen Kowalski broke into their homes while they were away at work or traveling. She filed police reports claiming harassment or abuse. Chip would show up shortly after, acting as a city official, resolving a neighbor dispute. In several cases, city fines were filed against the original families. In all cases, the families were black or Hispanic. Each time, Bernard sat quietly in the gallery, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. He didn't smile. He didn't react. He simply watched the tower of truth being built brick by damning brick. On the 7th day of the trial, Bernard took the stand. Maria guided him gently through his testimony. He explained the call from Alicia. The confrontation with Karen. The forged bill. The police response. The phone call to Chip. The threats. The arrogance. The racism. Then she asked, "In your professional opinion as an attorney, did Karen Kowalski have any legal claim to your property?" Bernard didn't blink. Absolutely not. Squatters' rights, or adverse possession, requires a continuous, open, and hostile occupation of a property for years, not hours. And certainly not through trespassing and fraud. Maria continued, "And did Mr. Kowalski's behavior that day resemble proper legal conduct for a city inspector?" Bernard leaned forward. He never presented any credentials. He made threats. He attempted to intimidate me by name-dropping city officials. His wife had just broken into my home, and he treated her as the victim. Maria nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson." The defense attorney stood up for cross-examination. "Mr. Johnson, isn't it true that you filed this lawsuit for personal gain? For the money?" Bernard gave a small smile. "I filed it for accountability. The damages reflect the cost of what was taken. Our peace, our safety, our dignity. If you think that's too high a price, you've never had your home invaded while your baby was in your arms." He glanced toward the jury. "I'm not in this for a payout. I'm in it for every family who didn't have the voice or the resources to fight back." Silence followed. The defense attorney sat down. Then came the final blow. Chip took the stand. Despite his attorney's advice, he insisted on telling his side. It was a disaster. He claimed the $300,000 in unreported income were gifts. He claimed his golf buddy, Reynolds, was an old friend, despite testimony proving Reynolds hadn't played golf in 5 years due to a spinal injury. He claimed Karen was mentally fragile and had accidentally misunderstood the law. Then Maria stood up. "Mr. Kowalski, did you or did you not approve permits for 15 contractors all linked to the same lodge?" Chip hesitated. I don't recall. Maria smiled. Allow me to refresh your memory with these 15 permits, each bearing your signature. The jury's eyes widened. Mr. Kowalski, did you or did you not tell police officers that the neighborhood had gone to hell because of certain people moving in? I was emotional. So you did say it? Yes. And were those certain people black? Chip paused. Maria's voice didn't rise, it sank. Cold and calm. Answer the question, Mr. Kowalski. Under oath. Yes. That was it. The jury had seen enough. 3 hours of deliberation later, they returned with a unanimous verdict. Guilty. On all counts. Chip Kowalski, 12 years in federal prison, $500,000 in fines, permanent disbarment from any government position. Karen Kowalski, 5 years in federal prison, $100,000 in fines, and a permanent restraining order preventing her from contacting the Johnson family or entering Riverside Heights. As the judge read the sentence, Karen collapsed into tears. Chip sat still, staring ahead as if trying to convince himself it wasn't happening. But it was. Justice wasn't just served, it was engraved in federal record. Outside the courthouse, Bernard stood before a sea of microphones. He didn't gloat. He didn't rage. He spoke with purpose. This case was never just about me. It was about every family who's ever been told they don't belong in their own home. Every citizen who's been silenced by the system meant to protect them. The Kowalskis thought they could use their race, their status, and their city connections to steamroll families like mine. Today, they learned, no one is above the law. Reporters shouted questions. But Bernard raised his hand. This chapter is over. But the civil case is still underway. And I promise you this, we're not stopping until every victim has their voice heard, and every system that enabled the Kowalskis is held accountable. He walked down the steps to Alicia and Marcus Jr. Waiting with soft smiles. And behind them, Riverside Heights, watching, clapping, and learning. Part 7, Legacy in Motion. 2 years after the day Bernard Johnson walked into his living room to find Karen Kowalski shouting and shoveling chips into her mouth, he walked into the federal courthouse once again, not as a witness, not as a plaintiff, but as the lead attorney in a landmark civil rights case now known across legal circles as Johnson vs. Kowalski et al. The courtroom was different now. Gone were the shackles. Gone was the tension of a criminal trial. But the stakes? Higher than ever. Because this wasn't just about two individuals anymore. This was about institutions. About policies. About the city of Brookline and its decades-long tolerance of silence and shadow deals. The gallery was filled with attorneys from across the country, civil rights scholars, Department of Justice observers, journalists, law school deans, even representatives from the ACLU and NAACP. Behind them sat the families Bernard and Jessica had uncovered. The 12 victims who had been swept under the rug for years. At the plaintiff's table, Bernard stood with purpose. On his right sat Jessica Rodriguez, eyes sharp behind her glasses. On his left, Alicia, calm and poised, not just as his wife, but now a registered legal liaison helping support housing discrimination victims statewide. And seated beside his wife, coloring quietly with a pack of crayons, was Marcus Jr. Now 2 years old, fully recovered from the chaos he was too young to remember. Across the room sat Karen and Chip Kowalski, in prison uniforms, their hair grayer, posture weaker, but defiance still twitching beneath their skin. They were there by federal order, transported in shackles and seated by court officers. The judge, Harrison Williams, stern and composed, called the courtroom to order. Bernard rose, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked to the center of the room. Your Honor, members of the jury, he began, his voice steady but strong. 2 years ago, Charles and Karen Kowalski made a calculation. That their race, their roles, and their reach gave them the right to terrorize families, to take what was not theirs, to manipulate the system with impunity. They were wrong. But they didn't act alone. He gestured to the files stacked neatly before him, a monument of documentation. The evidence shows a systematic conspiracy between 6 city employees, all of whom have since been tried and convicted. Together, they targeted families of color in middle-class neighborhoods. They falsified reports, harassed homeowners, initiated fraudulent code violations, and relied on a city system too indifferent, or too complicit, to stop them. He paused, walking slowly before the jury. This case is about justice, but it's also about accountability. Not just of individuals. Of institutions. Because what happened in Riverside Heights happened with the city's blind eye, year after year, complaint after complaint, victim after victim. We are seeking damages, yes. For trauma, for fear, for destroyed reputations. But we are also demanding structural reform. Real consequences. Real protection for the next family who has to defend their home against abuse in a different uniform. He returned to his seat in silence. The courtroom remained frozen for 3 seconds. Then Judge Williams nodded. Defense, you may proceed. The city's defense team, a highly paid firm from Chicago, did everything they could. They argued that the Kowalskis were rogue agents, not sanctioned by any supervisor. They claimed the city had no explicit policy enabling discrimination. They insisted the damages were unreasonably high. But what they didn't have was documentation. Bernard had it all. Every falsified inspection, every complaint dismissed, every record tied back to Chip's signature. And the crown jewel? A 3-year-old email exchange between the deputy director of building services and his boss. We're getting complaints about Chip showing favoritism and harassing black families. Should we look into it? Unless someone files a formal complaint with proof, don't create problems. He's been with us for 20 years. That was the moment Bernard knew they'd win. Over the next week, Bernard called up one family after another, black, Hispanic, Filipino, each telling a near-identical story. Karen showed up while we were at work. Claimed she lived there. Chip came the next day, said we were under investigation for misuse of space. Then code violation letters started arriving. We called the city. No one ever followed up. We moved out of fear. 12 families. Dozens of confirmed violations. Over $8 million in documented property damage, repairs, legal fees, and forced relocations. Then Bernard introduced the final surprise, a whistleblower. A former junior inspector, now relocated to Atlanta, testified that she was ordered to stay quiet about the Johnson situation by a mid-level supervisor. Her conscience brought her forward once she saw Bernard's story on national TV. It wasn't just incompetence, she said under oath. It was systemic suppression. They knew. And they didn't care. The jury deliberated for 2 full days. When they returned, their verdict hit like thunder. $12.5 million in compensatory damages, $25 million in punitive damages, mandatory restructuring of Brookline's Building Inspection Office, federal civil rights oversight of the department for 5 years, personal liability assigned to Chip and Karen, a court-ordered obligation to pay $2.8 million from any future income, inheritances, or asset transfers for the rest of their lives. Judge Williams addressed the defendants directly. Mr. and Mrs. Kowalski, your actions represent an assault on democracy, dignity, and decency. You used public office and social privilege as weapons against fellow citizens based solely on race and class. This court finds your behavior not only illegal, but morally reprehensible. He then turned to the city's legal team. And as for the city of Brookline, the evidence shows a pattern of willful indifference. Your inaction enabled this conspiracy to flourish. Let this judgment be a blueprint for reform. Outside the courthouse, Bernard was swarmed by reporters. With Alicia beside him and Marcus holding his hand, he gave the final quote that would go viral before midnight: "Racial harassment isn't just wrong. It's expensive. And starting today, every institution that enables it will be held to account. In public, in court, and under the law." That night, as the sun set over Riverside Heights, Bernard sat in his home office, the same one where he once called 911 while a stranger claimed his living room. He looked around. Everything was still. Everything was safe. Jessica texted him a snapshot from the New York Times. "The Johnson case becomes national model for civil rights enforcement." Underneath, an editorial praised Bernard for redefining modern litigation to protect homeowners from racialized abuse of power. But the message that hit hardest was from Maria Santos: "You did it. You made it bigger than revenge. You made it matter." 2 weeks later, Bernard received a call from the Attorney General's office. They wanted him to co-author a statewide initiative targeting systemic discrimination in property enforcement, permit approvals, and city-level harassment. The program would be piloted in Brookline and expanded statewide if successful. "Your documentation," the AG said, "has given us the clearest roadmap we've ever had." But the most important moment came one morning as Bernard was heading out the door. Marcus Jr., now 4, came running down the stairs, waving a piece of paper. "Daddy! Look what I drew." It was their house, the colonial home in Riverside Heights. Stick figures stood in front, him, Mommy, Marcus, and even Jessica with her laptop. At the top, Marcus had written, in careful preschool letters, "My family's house." Bernard smiled, crouched, and kissed his son's forehead. He walked over, pinned the drawing beside his framed law degree, and stepped back. On that wall now hung 3 symbols: his education, his justice, his family. Each one earned. Each one protected. And together, they told a story, not just of what was lost, or fought for, or reclaimed, but of what cannot be taken when a family fights back. The Kowalski case had closed. But the doors it opened would never be locked again. In life, we are often told that if we work hard, follow the rules, and build something meaningful, we'll be safe, that our homes will remain sacred, our names will carry weight, and our dignity will be respected. But what happens when someone tries to take all that away, not with force, but with entitlement, deception, and a system that turns a blind eye? The story of Bernard Johnson and his family is more than just a viral headline. It is a profound reminder that justice isn't automatic, it must be demanded, defended, and, sometimes, fought for publicly. It teaches us that evil doesn't always arrive wearing a mask or carrying a weapon. Sometimes, it wears a badge. Sometimes, it sits on your couch, eats your food, and dares to claim what's yours. Yet, even when wrong seems louder and more powerful, truth has a way of rising, if we stay steady. Bernard didn't win through anger. He won through preparation, integrity, and persistence. He chose courts over chaos, facts over fury, and legacy over revenge. His fight wasn't only for his wife or his child. It was for all of us, to prove that one voice, armed with truth, can dismantle generations of corruption. For seniors who've spent a lifetime watching the slow arc of justice, and for adults trying to teach the next generation about strength without violence, this story is a blueprint. It tells us that it's never too late to speak out. That communities change when ordinary people refuse to stay silent. And that your home, your story, is worth defending. So, if this story moved you, inspired you, or simply reminded you of what really matters in life, we ask one thing. Backhand index pointing right, comment below where you're watching from, let us know your thoughts. Thumbs up, like the video to help more people hear this message. Bell, and most importantly, subscribe and ring the bell to support our channel as we continue sharing stories that matter, stories of courage, truth, and the triumph of everyday heroes. Because this isn't just content. It's a community. And together, we shine a light where others look away.